Volodymyr Zelensky is being forced into the sort of choice that looks simple on a memo and feels impossible in a bunker. Washington and Moscow produced a 28-point peace proposal that would hand Russia most of what it has failed to win outright, while dressing Ukraine's surrender as realism. Zelensky's options are therefore not a menu, they are a set of traps, each with different costs, each watched by audience who will judge him by incompatible standards. Start with the core constraint, the law and legitimacy. Zelensky has repeatedly said that ceding territory, permanent neutrality, or a ban on NATO membership are unconstitutional. That is not rhetorical declaration. Ukraine's constitution bars alienation of territory and sets procedures that in wartime are politically and practically unreachable. So even if he wanted to sign a deal that recognizes Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk or other occupied areas as Russian, he'd be putting his name to something that his own legal order brands void. In politics, illegality is not just a technicality, it is the seed of future civil conflict, and he would be committing treason or at least an illegal act. Now, add the public mood after nearly 4 years of invasion, mass death, and a society reorganized around survival. Ukrainians do not want a peace that feels like a reward for the invader. The leaked plan reportedly demands Ukraine shrink its armed forces to around 600,000, abandon long-range weapons and accept a demilitarized buffer arrangement. Many Ukrainians hear this as Minsk again, a pause that lets Russia reload and come back when it suits. Zelensky knows this. If he signs something seen as rotten, he risks splitting the home front that has been his greatest strategic asset. Third constraint, timing designed to humiliate. Trump has set a Thanksgiving deadline, meaning by Thursday, the 27th of November. And then deadlines can be diplomacy, they can also be theatre. Here it functions like a stage light pointing at Kyiv, or a stage light of one of those interrogation lights. Accept quickly and quietly or refuse and be blamed for prolonging the war. Trump's rhetoric reinforces the frame that Ukraine is the obstacle, not Russia. Put crudely, Zelensky is being invited to look like the villain in a story whose plot Moscow wrote. Against that backdrop, Zelensky has 4 broad options. Option 1, sign the deal more or less as written. This is the quickest way to stop US pressure and in short run may secure continued American support for reconstruction money, but it is a strategic poison pill. Signing likely triggers a legitimacy crisis at home, not because Ukrainians are romantics, but because they have learnt what unprotected truces cost. It also collapses deterrence, and a smaller Ukrainian military plus uncertain security guarantees is an engraved invitation for Russia to try again in a few years. And even if the guns fall silent, Zelensky will be remembered as the president who converted battlefield endurance into diplomatic dispossession. That is not a legacy any leader survives. Option 2, refuse outright. Morally clean, politically popular at home, and consistent with constitutional limits, but it runs into the harsh arithmetic of dependence. The US has hinted that intelligence sharing and weapons flows could be curtailed if Kyiv doesn't comply. If that happens, Ukraine's capacity to hold the line through winter 2025-26 is weakened exactly when Russia is battering power infrastructure and probing along the front. An heroic refusal that produces military collapse is not heroism, it is catastrophe. Zelensky must therefore avoid a no that looks like petulance or ingratitude, because Washington would happily narrate that as betrayal. Option 3, engage, stall and amend. This is effectively what he is doing. He says he will work constructively with the US and European partners to offer alternatives, and he foregrounds the idea as a dignified peace. The point is to change the shape of the negotiation without snapping the US tie. This buys time to mobilize European leaders, to push back on the most toxic clauses, to reframe the deal around present front lines rather than speculative concessions. The risk is that stalling may still be treated as refusal by Trump, especially if the White House wants a quick trophy. But strategically, this is the only path that keeps both domestic legitimacy and alliance management in play. Option 4. Internationalize the process and shift the centre of gravity to Europe or to Istanbul. Erdogan has already invited that. European foreign ministers and EU leaders are already saying nothing without Ukraine, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and several capitals are scrambling to contest a plan that they were not shown. Zelenskyy can lean into that, making Europe not acquire but a co-author. That matters in two ways. First, European security guarantees can be more credible for Ukrainians than paper promises from a US administration that swings between flirtation and fury. Second, if Trump tries to suspend support, Europe can help fill parts of the gap, or at least make a US cutoff politically expensive. The limitation is obvious. Europe still cannot replace US scale quickly, but it can alter Trump's cost-benefit picture, which is precisely what Kyiv needs this week. Those options play out inside a domestic crisis that complicates everything. A $100 million energy sector corruption scandal has ignited rebellion within Zelenskyy's own parliamentary bloc, with demands that he sack Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak and purge his circle. Even if Zelenskyy is not personally implicated, wartime publics are unforgiving about graft, especially in the energy system that keeps families warm. The scandal gives Washington and Moscow extra leverage. They can say openly by insinuation that Kyiv is led by compromised men who should take what they are offered. Zelenskyy's room for manoeuvre shrinks if his coalition fractures, because any amended deal still requires parliamentary cover and public trust. So what's his best play? I think it's a three-part strategy. First, be legally explicit. Zelenskyy should keep repeating that certain points are unconstitutional, not as a slogan but as a boundary condition. That turns personal defiance into institutional necessity. It says to Trump, I'm not negotiating taste, I'm defending an order. Second, offer a counter-draft quickly, not a vague we have concerns, but a numbered alternative that keeps the US invested while forcing the debate onto substance. If he can present a revised plan anchored on the current line of control, phased sanctions relief tied to verified Russian withdrawal, and security guarantees that actually bind, then Trump can easily argue that Ukraine is blocking peace. Then Trump cannot easily argue that Ukraine is blocking peace. This is politics by paperwork, and it matters because Trump is obsessed with optics. The third option is to weaponize Allied unity. Zelenskyy spent this week on the phone with Macron, Starmer, Merz, Rutte and others. The aim is to make the amended peace plan a Western plan rather than a US-Russian plan. If Europe stands publicly beside Kyiv, Trump's attempt to isolate Ukraine as the holdout becomes harder to sell. Notice what ties all this together. Zelenskyy is not choosing between war and peace abstractedly. He is choosing between kinds of peace with different probabilities of future war, and between different kinds of alliance with different degrees of reliability. The savage part is the moral inversion built into Trump's choreography. The aggressor is offered readmission, sanctions relief, and the aura of statesmanship, while the victim is told to sign away its limbs by Thursday, or be blamed for bleeding. That inversion is not just cruel, it is historically illiterate. Every great power, truce, that rewards conquest teaches the conqueror to try again. If I were betting on Zelenskyy's path this week, it is the hard middle: engage without yielding, amend without insulting, mobilize Europe as both shield and megaphone. He cannot accept a plan that hollows out the state. He cannot rupture the US tie in anger. His job is to make delay look like responsibility and resistance look like reason. That is a narrow ridge to walk, but it is the only ridge that leads anywhere except the abyss when Trump and Putin are working together in this particular way. Trump has shown his hand, and it's not a hand that I think is very attractive. It's smeared in the same sort of blood that is dripping from Putin's fingertips. And it's disturbing that this is from the man who claims to represent the democratic world.